All right, a good day to all. Sam here with you. We're Tuesday, April 24th, and we've done our polling amongst the members, and we've got three spreads we're going to look at today. We start with ADA, Cardano to Bitcoin. Now, I've got it up here on a 4-hour to Bittrex. And there's a few things that we've looked at this coin before, and I've shown this before, but just to review here, so I have this as a WX, we're coming down for the Y, and so here was the technical pivot. So if we work from our X to our A low, we come to our 50, and you can see here we get a little front run on the first target, but then we get our second target to the tick. So, algos making money, right, as they usually do, and then we get our first little bump here where we get a higher low. So coming off of what sets up as a technical pivot, we get the bounce, and then we get a higher low, and now we've started into this move coming off of that low. So as we look here, so a few things to note. Of course, all of these pivots we've got to check on the way back. So the very first one, right, so this was meaningful. We know that was significant. That was significant. We're going to come up to the 50 and the 618, but you got to look at these as well. You got to check all of them because you just don't know where you're going to run into it. So there's potentially now, that's a front run on this 50 here, but you got to check all of them. You got to check that one as well. So the idea is not that we can't get through them, all right? And that ultimately that means that we've got to go down to that target. So here's the 50, here's the target. That's not what I'm suggesting. But you do want to be aware of where you're likely to run into selling pressure, right? It's just algorithm, just going to sit there. It's just going to work from these major pivots. So you want to be aware of all of them. Certainly this is one we got to pay attention to, right? It's not unlike what we see with Bitcoin. So this significant pivot here that set up that led to this technical pivot, we got to pay attention to that. We know we're likely, and you can see here there's all sorts of reasons why we're likely to come into some resistance at the very least there, if not very active algo selling. So just the point is know it's there. That's kind of what I'm trying to get to. All right, so with that, a few things here. And this is irresistible. As a technician, I can't resist this. So that's why you wick these things off. So if I get right on there, you can see how precise that is. So it's why it's always a good idea to wick off pivots like that. So even though it seems like it wouldn't have any relevance to the current price action, if I get that one right there, you'll be surprised how often those will reappear. Even these, just it's a good idea to get a wick on them, just so if we come back to it, they have a tendency to reappear in the market. So just a few subtle little reminders of things that can be useful. And you can see I've done the same thing here. So I've wicked off potentially now what we get here is I've got a 1-2. And now this is where it gets a little tricky going in here. So I'm going to open this up a little bit. Let's go down to, we'll go to a 2-hour here and we get a better look at this. Let's pop it a little bit and let me open it up for you so you can see it better. So working from our technical low here, right, we get that all lined up here. So if this is 1-2, well, we've got some interesting subdivision here that's creating, it's ultimately a more bullish count, but it's open to some interpretation. So a few things here. So yet again here, I would wick off this potentially, hypothetically. We don't know for sure, but that plays potentially as a 1. Now, if I go down to my oscillators here, we can see that here's my peak. So this, certainly sets up as some sort of a 3, 4, 5 could be. So what I see here now, let me show this to you. With this, the idea being here that we've got a motive wave and an impulsive wave nonetheless. If I've got 1-2, well, it's tempting. I can see a 5. Let me get this off here because this gets a little screwy sometimes. Okay, so let's get that back. So if I've got 1-2, I can see a good clean 5 waves into this 1. So it's hard to argue with that as my 1 coming off of this low. I get a deep 2, but then the subdivision is all very good. So 1-2. Then it's tempting to go 1, 2, 3, 4 going up for the 5. But the depth of this retracement kind of gets my attention. So let me get in there a little bit tighter and show you what I'm thinking. So if I get this right on that. So I see another 1-2 for a couple of reasons. First being that if I work from this pivot low to this pivot high, all right, I come right to a 50. I don't overlap this 1, but the depth of that would imply to me that this is a candidate. I can see a 3 wave here for a 2. All right, so I've got an ABC deep retracement we hold these pivots, it kind of implies to me, sure, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4. We don't overlap, but the depth of that looks more like a 2 than a 4 to me. So, you know, if you're trying to build the case there, which is all we can do, then I look here and I say, okay, if that's 1, 2, well, look where my potential third here is. Well, we know the negative 100, right? So this is a good example where we can use that shorthand. Now, it's only a 50. We don't make the 618, so we're not going to be right on top of it. But if I take the length of this 1 and I project it from that 2, well, I get a bit of a confluence zone up here where I've got my wave 3 target up here. Right, so this is technical. I guess I should move this over a bit. If I can, where's my pivot? So you can see that shape a little bit better. Okay, so here's my wave 3 target. Well, so if we go up here, so of course we're a little bit shy of the 1618. We may not be done yet here. This 4 may not be in. But I can look here and I see if that's a 1, 2, then I've got 1, 2, 3. So if I look there, I say, well, that's 1, 2, 7, 2. So I could have 1, 2. So I'd want to check that. So if that's 1 here and I go 2, well, then I come over here. I do the same thing looking here. You know, we're kind of in between, but the depth of this suggests that I've got a 4. So so putting it all together, what I now see, and I think the price action is supportive here, is that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. I guess I've got to take that even smaller. We've got to go to, what am I on, 7 micro? Let's go to minuscule. We're getting really tiny there. So here's a 1, 2, 3. I guess I can take this up. We can go up a degree so we can see it a little bit better. Let's go to micro. Okay, there we go. So we've got, so that's a lot of 1, 2s, right? So that's just what you want, the more bullish the market. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's a lot of 1, 2s. But it sets up, right? It plays. So 1, 2, we look like we're completing here. So we want to be looking for that. So if that count is right, now there are going to be some tells that we can use to help identify where and what kind of pivots we get. So let's take that off. Okay, so here we know that's a candidate here for the third relative to this 1, 2. But I've also got the dominant 1, 2 back here. So let me scrunch in a little bit. See if we can build this case. So of course, with that kind of structure, we're going to put a pitchfork on it. So we're going to go there. So this is the geometry that I think. So I've got a modified, pardon me, I've got a shift on this. So I've got a shift pitchfork. So we're going up 50% in price for the median line. But look how this has, you know, done a fairly good job. And it's worth looking at. So let me make sure I'm right on here. You want these to be spot on. So let's get them tightened up. So bear with me while I get this dialed in. Just the process you have to go through every time you change framing and the time frame. Okay, so now we have it here. So this looks to me like this is good geometry for this market. Now I'm up here at the 200. Here's the 2.5 relative to the median line. So if I'm 1, 2 here, so I've got to be checking that 1, 2, 3 relative to where that could be going, because now we're talking about a pretty extreme movement here for the third relative to this 1, 2. So we could be challenging the 2618, which is about as far as they'll go without some sort of a reaction. So if I pull this over, you see what I'm doing here. So here's the 2618 relative to this 1, 2. So that's still, that's a contender here. So we can't be sure yet whether the 4 is in, but it's a very reasonable case that may. So if I look here, now this is 1, 2, this would be here relative to that 4. So you got to kind of stack it and see, does this make sense? Could we get there? And if so, what does that imply for the next move? So here would be the 2618. So this would be an extreme relative to the third here in green. 1, 2. If we're going to get up that high, well, how can we get there? Well, there's 1, 2. So we'd be looking for this fifth to be topping up here. So potentially, so slightly higher high here. This could go higher. I mean, it's just, there's no telling. We've got a really strong move underway. So we can use this, the market's geometry, as we can see here. So we've got this, so you can almost see a potential head and shoulders setting up here. Potentially that's an A, that's a B, and this 4 is deeper. right? So that potentially is a scenario that we could see. So you might have A, B going in, so we check that. So it might look something like this going down here for a 4 relative to this 1. So we're going to wick off that 1 as well here, right? A contender as a 1. We can't be sure that's a 1 because we have the possibility for 1, 2, 3, 4 stays impulsive because we don't overlap that 1. But this is my preferred count, so we'll see, what kind of action we get up here. It certainly looks strong. Of course, we'd want to check knowing that a B wave can go to the 786, and you see we've tagged the 786 to the tick now. I've got the 887 on there as well with kind of a last stand, so I'm going to take that off. All right, so potentially a B wave goes in. So A, possibly B. Now if we get much beyond this, I would recount it. I'd consider the 4th in. Let's go down a degree. That doesn't make sense. So that's a contender here. So we got kind of a wait and see. I almost like it better if we come down here because the map to get up to this 3rd plays a little bit better to me. If I've got this right as 1, 2, 3, I'd like to see that 4 come down a little bit more. So now I know it's getting very hard to see in here. So let me pull some of this off. So here's a contender count right here. Right? This being the key assumption I'm making here is that I've got a B and I've got one more leg down here. So if I measure that, take my fib tool, I work from my 2 to the proposed 3 high. What would this give me? Well, here's my 38. Here's my 50. So anywhere in this range would make sense to me and would still set up for this right here. So mapping it out. How can we get there? That's all I'm trying to do. We know this is my 2618 target up here. So if I put that, so we look at it here. So let me get there's my target. Let me put the wave on that so you can see what I'm trying to get at. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, as deep as the 50, could do it. Down for the 50, if that C is going to unfold, and we're going to get a lower low here from the A. So if our C is coming down, we might go, here's the 38, so that's reasonable. So 1, 2, 3, 4, up for the 5, then we'd be looking like this. So if I put that on, so trying to combine all of this. Do you see what I'm after here? So 1, 2, 3, 4, up we go for the 5 to complete the 5th of the 3rd relative to this 1, 2. Right? So it's waves within waves within waves. It's the fractal nature of Elliott wave. So this is exactly what you're looking for. So the anticipation here is that we've got this, we've got all the subdivision we want to see. So this is our question mark. Is the 4 in? Or is, do we have the ABC here, or do we have one more kick down? So a break of that high would reduce that probability. So for new trades, either you've got the opportunity to be a buyer here looking for the 5th of the 3rd, right? So here, right, in white, that's one contender. That's, the upside is not as good there. So if you were trying to be selective about where the opportunity is, the better trade would be the larger degree 4 to the 5. But all of that sets up inevitably the return to the mean. So if I put the final wave on it, so we get all of those waves, and I know this gets harder to see. So 1, 2, up for the big 3, 4, 5. So there's your roadmap. I know it gets very hard to see it, so let me pull some of this off. See if you can get that. So there it is. 1, 2, big 3, 4 to the median line. Would that make sense? So if we're just just trying to construct the roadmap. So if we're up here, well, that would put us between the 23 and the 38 for a return to the median line, if we get that. So all you can do is kind of lay out a roadmap like that and say, well, if we get this action down here and then we move up here, well, it would appear that it's following that roadmap just perfectly. The market has a way of throwing you head fakes constantly to get you relabeling, recounting, realigning, rethinking. Right? This is not supposed to be easy. But there is a roadmap that would get us all the way there, the big 4 coming, right, relative to this 1. Right? So if we get that, then a return back down here to the 38 sets it up for the last push up to complete all of this now. So if we go back and think about where it could be going. Now we put this in context. So there's our target. Now we start where we started. We started thinking about some of these dominant pivots where we're likely to run into resistance as those algos kick in trying to sell it. So look, here. So what do we get? So there's our target here. So we get a confluence zone here, all setting up for a reasonable target for the 5th off of this technical pivot where we started. So put that all together. Here comes a reasonable target if we're coming off of this as 1, 2, big 3 in green, down for the 4. There's our target. What does that do? All that sets up for is a very large 1, 2. So we're back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I gotta pull that out a little bit, put it in context so we can see where we could be going. So if that's 1, then there's 2, then the big 3, whoops, the big 3, this is the one we wait for, the big 3, the big 4, and the big 5, right? So that's your roadmap there. All we're trying to do is complete our initial one wave of the larger degree. And the fact that that could come in right at the 50, so we get this confluence zone here, sets up the 2, which sets up the big 3. So all of it is about getting positioned to be there for this leg, right? All of this completing the 1, we wait for the 2. There's the 50. That's the moneymaker. This is the leg. You're always looking to try and get the 3rd of the 3rd. So that's the big moneymaker. We're just going to wait and try and let this thing set up. Now, that doesn't mean there's not opportunity to be trading in here. But here's the big one. So the closer we stay with this kind of account, the sell-off comes, and that's the back the truck up trade. Right, we know this is a strong project. I know this is a terrific team, and there's a lot of fundamental data to support the long-term potential of Cardano. It's one of the most popular cryptos and one of the most useful. So this setup here all really just kind of sets up. So you got to be patient. You got to wait for these. These can be, you know, these don't come along like that very often. So that's one that's absolutely should be on your radar. Let's let this play itself out. There's lots of opportunity here, right? The point in pulling out is try and get some perspective on where we are and where we could be going. All right, guys, I'll wrap it there.